In a world full of no money, no jobs, help, I'm poor, and no economy. America and the Great Depression.
Oh, hey! I didn't see you there. Hi, I'm Franklin D. Roosevelt, the President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And although it's hard for me to stand, I'll show you today how people stood in the Great Depression, where all of this disappeared.
So, what is the Great Depression? Depression was a time where Americans were depressed greatly, hence Great Depression. The Great Depression was actually when the stock market crashed on October 1929, which marked the end of 6 years of unparalleled prosperity for most sectors of American economy. The crash begins on October 24th. By October 29th, stock prices will plummet and banks will be calling in loans. An estimated $30 billion in stock values will quote-unquote disappear by mid-November. What was life before the Great Depression?
Sharply. The buildings were higher. The parties were bigger. The morals were looser and the liquor was cheaper. The restlessness approached hysteria.
That is until the stock market crashed, where 3.2 million people are unemployed. When you have 3.2 million people unemployed in America, and when you had 1.5 million the October the stock market crashed, that's when you know the stock market was a big part of the American economy, business, and that's when you know things can get scary.
Hi, I'd like to cash in my $13 trillion bond, please.
Oh, yes, sir. Here you go.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Have a nice day.
You too.
You see, it all started when banks, in the late 1920s, started to sell bonds and stocks
Next.
that the banks couldn't actually pay for.
Hello, ma'am. My name is David.
When you look at the graph, you can see that in 1910 there was 6% unemployment rate. In 1929, you can see that the graph starts to rise up to 22% unemployment rate. The Great Depression was an economic slump in North America, Europe, and other industrialized areas of the world that began in 1929 and lasted until about 1939. It was the longest and most severe depression ever experienced by the industrialized Western world. Though the U.S. economy had gone into depression 6 months earlier, the Great Depression may be said to have begun with a catastrophic collapse of the stock market prices on the New York Stock Exchange in October 1929. During the next 3 years, stock prices in the United States continued to fall until by late 1932 they dropped only to about 20% of their value in 1929. Besides, America was always this dream to come to America, get a job, and start a life with your family and feed your kids. But when you have kids asking people, why can't you give my dad a job? You know the American dream was ruined with the Great Depression. Along with this, a lot of people were unemployed, depressed, and people just wanted to work, but there was no jobs to be available.
People who were once rich were now poor.
No wifing in the club. Give me $20. Give me $20. Give me $20. No wifing in the club. Give me $20. Give me $20. Give me $20. No wifing in the
People in Hooverville, also known as Town with cardboard boxes. We're in despair and only drink good old Hoover stew.
Sorry, folks, all out.
See, people were so desperate that they had to sell apples for 5
5-cent
cents.
apples.
The culture quickly changed from happiness to selling apples on the street for 5 cents.
People in Hooverville were so desperate that they sold apples
5 cents an apple.
for 5 cents.
Hooverville became a common term for Shacktown's homeless encampments during the Great Depression. There were dozens in the state of Washington, hundreds throughout the country, each testifying to the housing crisis that accompanied the employment crisis of the early 1930s. Hooverville was a deliberately politicalized label emphasizing that President Herbert Hoover and the Republican Party were to be held responsible for the economic crisis and its miseries. Luckily, the president changed to Frederick D. Roosevelt. Who is Frederick D. Roosevelt?
Roosevelt? Oh, he was our 32nd president. It's funny because he stood for America, but he couldn't even stand for himself.
Frederick D. Roosevelt apparently had polio, but according to Mr. Pierce, he didn't. The famous "There's nothing to fear except fear itself" is FDR's first inaugural address in 1932. Here's an excerpt. "This great nation will endure as it has endured, will revive and will prosper. So first of all, let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. In every dark hour of our nation life, a leadership of frankness and vigor has met with that understanding and support of the people themselves which is essential to victory. I am convinced that you will give that support to leadership in these critical days." All in all, the Great Depression can be summarized with this song by Bing Crosby called "Brother, Can You Spare a Dime?"
They used to tell me I was building a dream, and so I followed the mob. When there was earth to plow or guns to bear, I was always there, right on the job. They used to tell me I was building a dream, with peace and glory ahead. Why should I be standing in line, just waiting for bread? Once I built a railroad, I made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower up to the sun, brick and rivet and lime. Once I built a tower, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once in khaki suits, gee, we look swell, full of that Yankee doodly-dum. 500,000 boots went slogging through hell, and I was the kid with the drum. Say, don't you remember, they called me Al. It was Al all the time. Why don't you remember, I'm your pal. Say, buddy, can you spare a dime? once in khaki suits. Ah, gee, we looked swell, full of that Yankee doodly-dum. 500,000 boots went slogging through hell, and I was the kid with a drum. Oh, say, don't you remember, they called me Al. It was Al all the time. Say, don't you remember, I'm your pal. Buddy, can you spare a dime?
The Great Depression marked a hard time for the United States of America, especially when hitting the Dust Bowl. The only thing to bring it up from this downfall is a world war. In little over a year following Japan's December 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. will enter the world in the Pacific and in Europe. The war effort will jumpstart U.S. industry and effectively end the Great Depression.